Shamamalaka Namaste. Domo arigato. I am the great and big alien guy from Planet Cryptid Master and salutations. The world, as we know it, is about to be recycled. Your only way to escape, to survive this whole ordeal, is to join the big alien brain cult and journey with us to the stars and subscribe. Please, I welcome you to Heaven's Gate. And I'm back. Welcome to the channel, everyone. It's been some time. The approaching millennium that we've all seen has found the flames of a most curious phenomenon. UFO cults. A synthesis of mainstream religion and cutting-edge science fiction. Belief in these big alien technological angels has fueled mankind's faith in a divine, and it comes from faith, in a divine plan for the universe. Belief in these technological angels has always fanned the animate and science fiction novels, has always indoctrinated and pretty much inspired mankind, and for over the last 2 decades. But one Pacific group that has really stood out from the rest is the one we'll be talking about today. Heaven's Gate. But before we get in that, please make sure to subscribe. I have come back, and hit like and join the Cryptid Master KD cult. Yeah, except the only thing we'll be doing is a new one called Bigfoot Worshipping. Let's do that. Now, to get into Heaven's Gate, which took 22 years of behavioral modification under a one-man spell. To understand it, we must see and talk about its leader, a man named Marshall Applewhite, or Herf Applewhite, as he was sometimes called. And his teachings that halted in 1997, then, and the mass suicide of the UFO cult of Heaven's Gate. 8. This tragedy was a result of 22 years of behavior modification under Marshall Applewhite's spell. In March of 1997, and Marshall Applewhite, the leader of the Heaven's Gate UFO cult, told his followers that there was a UFO following the once every millennia seen Hale-Bopp comet that orbits the Earth once every 2,000 years. He convinced him and that there was a UFO on the back of the cult, of the tail of the comet, which would take them. He convinced them that this was their signal. The comet was their signal to board the flying saucer, which would take them into eternity. In order to catch the ride, though, the 39 cult members committed suicide. Oh, by a combination of toxic drugs called phenobarbital and alcohol as mixed in a terrible substance. This tragedy was the combination of 22 years of behavioral modification under Applewhite's spell. For reasons that are unknown, they wore Nike running shoes, sported bald haircuts, and $22 of change in their pockets. For reasons they were unknown, they wore Nike's running shoes. But where did this entire thing, this tragedy, begin? Well, to understand that, we're going to get started. We must first understand the leader, Marshall Applewhite, otherwise at first known as Herb Applewhite. He was born in 1930, or somewhere in that time. And then, now, Marshall Applewhite he served in the Army for some time. Marshall Applewhite's father often taught him about the most favorite thing. His father was a pastor at the local church. And one of their favorite things to talk about, this is way prior to the whole Heaven's Gate phenomenon. They would usually talk together about biblical prophecy. And Marshall and his dad's favorite thing to read about was biblical prophecy and sci-fi novels. For that amount of time, Marshall was known as a very good man, and pretty much eventually, a few years later, he got married, served in the Army, and had a very good career of music teaching and professional singing at the university. But one of the main real leaders in this whole cult, everyone, was the real one who put the whole thing, who set the wheels in motion for this tragedy, was a woman called Bonnie Lou Nettles. These two who would later meet. But now, back to Applewhite. Applewhite was very talented in the world of music. He had an awesome career of teaching music class at a local school university. Everybody saw him as a big guy of music. And he was very much liked by the public. Meanwhile, Bonnie Nettles was very, very good woman. She had a great husband, fatherly man, and pretty much and 3 children. But the one that. But she and her daughter in the recent years told of her time with her mother when her daughter's name's Terry Nettles, and in 2020 she actually came forward with it. And Bonnie Nettles was, and her daughter Terry, who remembered when they were, she was 14 years old and she actually would look up for UFOs and stuff. She also began like seances. She was told that Bonnie Nettles was pretty much the main person who had started it all. She ended up pretty much doing a lot of weird stuff over the majority of the last couple years. She became quite interested in seances and spiritual guidance and all. She would attend seances. She would pretty much give a lot of effort. She even was told by a psychic and she was convinced that one of the Catholic monks was speaking to her. But the one thing that comes out with Bonnie Nettles, who would become the main focuser on the whole Heaven's Gate and one of the main founders. She was told by a psychic medium that she would eventually meet a man who was Texan and had golden and light hair. And all this was where it all started. And this whole thing really took a toll on her marriage. Bonnie Nettles would eventually, a couple years later, she would eventually end up leaving her family in search of spiritual guidance and all, to find the one she was destined to meet. Basically, she just up and left her family, and that was it. Whew. So I bet you're all going to ask now, where does this come in with Marshall? Okay, well, here's what was happening. Meanwhile, in Corpus Christi, Texas, in nearby Corpus Christi, Marshall Applewhite, who would later be known as Doe, his perfect life began to unravel. His 16-year marriage dissolved, and his great career as a college music professor ended. You see, according to eyewitnesses and all, whatever, he was accused of a messed up, dirty, an S relationship with one of his male students. And he was said that he had a lover who was a male student at his job as a school musician. This would ultimately make him get fired. That didn't make sense, but you know what I'm saying. That it would result in him getting fired from his job as a college musical professor. Eventually, and not long after that, his 16-year marriage, his wife, his 16-year married wife all that would result in her leaving him. So that this was a very big blow and a very, you see, to understand Marshall, you have to understand that he was raised with a religious, pretty much Catholic, or however you want to put it. Basically, he had a lot of dysfunctional problems with his love life back in that day, which will be a very big key point in the Heaven's Gate cult. Not long after, his father, who he was very attached to and really was his closest family, would pass away in the 60s, in the early times. And after that, he would just be devastated. Heavens. Basically, he would end up checking into a mental hospital. A hospital that which would be a big thing for the meeting here. Now, Bonnie Nettles, at the time, this was the big part of the whole prophecy said by the medium and all, that he pretty much, as if it were the hands of fate here. Bonnie Nettles was coincidentally at the same time when Marshall was checked in. She worked at the mental hospital as a nurse. She pretty much, that's when Marshall Applewhite met Bonnie Lou Nettles, just as her 22-year marriage was ending as well. Now, let's get on track here. They pretty much, this is where it all hit off. Because Marshall Applewhite was Texan. And she was told he was going to be Texan. And all. So they pretty hit it off pretty much very, very high starting. And eventually they began on their spiritual journey of making star charts and all that. You know, they would, and one of the big things they would talk about is sci-fi novels. Really. One of the most infamous cults ever. The two leaders met, of all people, she met Applewhite at a mental hospital. You would kind of think for yourself here that he was there for a reason. Nobody. I don't know what fate was trying to play here, but eventually, the two of them pretty much hit it off. Not long after, they would go on what they would refer to as a spiritual road trip. Where they would wander in search of followers. They filled their new doctrine philosophy with both religious prophecy and sci-fi novels. So it came this time as a technological angel thing. Now, Bonnie and Herf were very, very much kicking it off really hard. they began writing their their book, the Holy Book of Marshall Applewhite and the Big Brain Alien. And after a year on the road, their unorthodox doctrine began to take shape in their beliefs. They convinced themselves that they were, and from the book of Revelations, which spoke of the two witnesses who would be here to lead humanity up off a corrupt world. They convinced themselves later on that they would eventually become, that they were God's emissaries, here to lead humanity to salvation. And God was a big-brained alien. I mean, this cult has barely started and already things are going mental. It's up a... Ugh. Now, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie would have some weird, some delays upon their journey. They would become, and Applewhite was arrested in Texas or somewhere there for stealing a rental car. But during his 6-month jail sentence, he fine-tuned his doctrine. Now, the reason he stole the car is pretty much bizarre. I really... There are a lot of reasons why every channel talks about, but Marshall Applewhite, when he was released, they began their teachings of the word of the big-brained alien. Not long after that, they would go looking for followers. Now, there were many times they turned pretty much their whole, thing into a business. Though I may not be making sense here, I'm trying the best to explain Heaven's Gate as best I can. So, they pretty much hit off, and they turned their sci-fi novel doctrine into a business. They eventually would gain like 20, 30 followers at the least. Now, there is so much about that time and that doctrine with the followers and all that I had, and so short a time on this video, that I have no idea how to pronounce it all. So, basically, let's get into the beliefs of the cult. According to many eyewitnesses, I shouldn't say that, but according to records, basically, the whole point of Heaven's Gate, or human individual metamorphosis, or HIM, is the best way to put it. Human individual metamorphosis would later become... The whole point of it was for the followers and the students of Heaven's Gate, in order to catch the ride into the UFO. Basically, it was more of a waiting game. That there was a UFO coming to Earth to sent by God, who was an alien, to basically take them into eternity. Now, when you think of eternity, the best place is heaven. Except it would be a planet. And pretty much this is where you would think of Asgard from the Thor franchise in the Marvels. So, and according to their philosophy and their beliefs here in the great teachings of Marshall Applewhite, that all religions of around the world were linked. And they believed in shape-shifting lizard people who were corrupting mankind, called Luciferians. Oh boy. The list goes on and on. But basically their whole pointage here was to help the members overcome their human desires, like drugs, money, or sexual desires. Now this sounds almost... Oh boy, I'm not making sense. But here's the thing that would eventually lead to it all. You know, Marshall and... Oh boy. If you've been watching this far, like for the last, I don't know, few minutes, you'd probably ask... if this video gets like 1,000 likes or maybe even a few hundred views and subscribers, I think the challenge here is to not click off this video. Because you're listening to a crazy, immortal alien boy. Now, to get back to the events, a lot of where, eventually the whole prophecy thing. You know what? This will be part 1 to the video, so... Because I am getting exhausted and hungry, and pizza's coming. I mean, from Planet Pizza. If you guys understood most of what I talked about here today, you can leave it in the comments. But I promise you there will be a part 2 to this. And I apologize for not making a video in a while. And if... I get it if none of what I said made any sense. But in part 2 to this video, we will be discussing the eventual downfall and how a lot of messed up stuff and how it affected so many people in Heaven's Gate 8. So, I'm gonna go now. I promise I will do a part 2 to this in the next few days. So, in that case, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm really sorry I haven't uploaded a video in a while, but that's gonna change. I'm gonna get some new stuff to upgrade my videos to complete scary and horror, like all you really want. Because that's what the channel's all about. It's about making scary and completely terrifying. So, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm Cryptid Master KD. I'll see you guys in part 2, and peace out.